We continue now at the top of Daf Yudalad Amud Aleph Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 14a. On the previous summit, the Gemara was discussing whether there is pigul when the Kohen dips his finger into the blood by the chatos hapnimios. That's the carbon chatos, which they sprinkled the blood inside the heichal, inside of the Beis Hamikdash. And the question essentially is that one of the fundamental avodos, one of the critical avodos of the dam, of these karbonos, that there would be pigul in that situation? And the idea of pigul would be that at the time that he's dipping his finger into the blood, the Kohen has a machshava, he has an intention of consuming the carbon chutz lizmano, which is pigul. And so the question is, again, can pigul happen at that time or not? And on the previous summit, the Gemara suggested that that would be a machlokas tanoim, because there seems to be a machlokas in brises about this very issue. But the Gemara says, no, it's not necessarily a machlokas tanoim, because it could be that the brisa which says that it's not pigul is actually just following Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah, because Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah says that in general, holacha, the conveying of the blood to the mizbeach, that is not considered to be a critical avoda. It's not considered to be an important enough avoda that we say there's pigul over there. And really the dipping, when the Kohen dips his finger into the blood by the chatos hapnimios, that is just a form of holacha, and all of holacha is not important enough to make pigul according to Rabbi Shimon, and so therefore essentially that brisa might be following Rabbi Shimon. And the Gemara now says, how can you say that that brisa follows Rabbi Shimon, but Rabbi Shimon wouldn't be relevant at all, because Rabbi Shimon happens to hold kol she'enu al mizbeach hachitzon keshlamim, any carbon which you're not doing the avoda on the outer mizbeach like a shlamim, and here we're talking about the chatos hapnimios, so the avoda is being done inside the Beis Hamikdash, it's not on the mizbeach hachitzon. He says if it's not being done on the mizbeach hachitzon, ein bo mishum pigul, there's no pigul anyhow, and so why start discussing this little detail of whether there's pigul at the time of the dipping of the Kohen's finger into the blood? There would be no pigul at all by such karbonos according to Rabbi Shimon, so it would not make sense to say that that brisa is following Rabbi Shimon. And Rashi explains, Kol carbon she'enu al mizbeach hachitzon keshlomim, any carbon that's not on the outer mizbeach like a shlomim, shelamadnu mehem pigul, and shlomim again is the source of pigul, l'chol azvachim for all other karbonos, so ein bo mishum pigul, again, if it's the avod is not on the mizbeach hachitzon, there's no pigul over there. L'kamon beperek beis Shammai, that's going to be said later on in perek beis Shammai. And so the Gemara continues and says, Elohava ha-Rabbanan, rather both brises follow the Rabbanan who do not restrict pigul to cases where the blood is applied on the Mizbeach HaChitzon. And the Gemara says, V'lo kash, it's not difficult. Kan b'chatos hachitzonos, kan b'chatos hapnimios. One brise is talking about the chatos hachitzonos, those are the chatos where the blood is applied to the outer Mizbeach, and the other brise is talking about the chatos hapnimios, again where the blood is brought inside of the Beis Hamikdash. And Rashi explains, b'chatos hachitzonos, when it comes to the outer chatos, eina mefageles, there is no pigul over there, to lo ksiv behu v'taval. We're talking here specifically about the taking of the blood with the finger. There it's not going to have pigul over there by the outer chatos, because it doesn't say the word v'taval by the chatos hachitzonos like it does by the chatos hapnimios. Ella, rather, all it says by the chatos hachitzonos, even though it is true that the chatos hachitzonos, the blood is applied with the hand of the Kohen, with the finger of the Kohen, but all it says over there is v'lokach haKohen midam hachatos be'etzbo. It says that the Kohen takes from the blood of the chatos with his finger. V'ahi lakicha kabolohi, and the word lakicha over here refers to kabolas adam, the receiving of the blood. Uminoy alfinan kabola lekamon be'ezo mekomon. It's from there that we learn how Kabbalah later on in ezo mekomon, and the Gemara will continue and elaborate upon this idea, but essentially the difference is that the word that is used by the chatos hachitzonos v'lokach is not the same as the word that is used by the chatos hapnimios, which is v'taval, and so therefore where it says v'taval, that's a significant avoda, and again there's pigul over there, but where it says v'lokach, that is not considered a significant enough avoda that there would be pigul. And the Gemara continues and says, chatos hachitzonos, but you're talking about the outer chatos, pshita, isn't it obvious? The Gemara initially assumes it is obvious that over there there's no pigul, because lo ksiv behu v'taval, it doesn't say the word v'taval, and if it doesn't say the word v'taval, so again, it should be obvious that there's no pigul by the dipping of the finger in the blood in that situation. And the Gemara says, no, Itzrich, it is necessary to teach, because sal kadai techamina, one might have thought, hoel uchsiv v'lokach, since it doesn't say, it's true it doesn't say v'taval, but it says v'lokach. We'll take a look at the full pasuk. The full pasuk says, "V'lokach haKohen midam hachatos be'atzbo." It says the Kohen takes from the blood of the chatos with his finger. V'nasan al karnos mizbach ha'olah, and he places it on the corners of the mizbeach ha'olah, which is the outer mizbeach. V'yas kol dama yishpoch al yisod mizbeach, then he pours all the blood by the yisod of the mizbeach. So since it says v'lakach, v'asi kof, and let's say a monkey would come, and rami lu ayade, and the monkey would place the blood on his hand, boy lemishkal zivin achrisa, he wouldn't need to take the blood again, that would not count. The monkey taking the blood would not be effective in this situation, and so therefore, command v'taval dami, one might think since that's true, it's the same thing as if it wrote v'taval. Kamash malan, and so that's what we're teaching us over here, that's what the Bryce is teaching, lahachi lo kasiv v'taval, for that reason it doesn't say v'taval, demash mahachi umash because it's able to be understood this way and could be understood that way, meaning to say it could be understood that yes, if a monkey does it, that would not be good. The Kohen has to do it himself, but it is not at the level of v'taval that it is a significant avoda, which there would be pigul during that part of the avoda, again, if in fact it was significant. And Rashi explains, it's stricha, it is necessary, what might you have said, siv v'lokach, since it's written v'lokach, demashma hu bi'atzmo yikach, which implies it's understood that he himself, the Kohen himself, is taking it, he's taking the blood. V'yosi kov v'rami lo ayade, and if a monkey would come and place it on his hand, al etzbo, on his finger, boy mahadro mishkal, he need to take it again. Alma v'lokach nami atzbo kai, so you see that the v'lokach is going on his finger, sheyitzbo etzbo, it means the same thing, he has to dip his finger. So ema kamandach so one might think it's as if it did write v'taval. And so the Gemara says, Lachi lo kasve tvila, for that reason again, it doesn't say v'taval behedya, it doesn't say it explicitly, ela kasav kabola, rather it says like a receiving of the blood. Umidasamche atzbo, and then for the fact that it puts it next to his finger, it says over there, v'nasan hu diyolif litvol etzbo. It's from there that we learn, since it says, again, that it's with his finger, he's going to be v'nasan al karnos mizbach ha'ola, that shows that shetzarech likach bi'atzmo, that shows that he's going to have to dip his finger, he's going to have to take it himself, v'litvol, and dip it. The mashma hachi, the lote tvilas etzba avoda chashuva behen lefagil. It's mashma both ways. On the one hand, it's understood that it's not considered, the dipping of the finger is not considered an important enough avoda that there would be pigul. From the fact that the Torah doesn't spell it out explicitly. Umashmachi, but it's also understood the other way. Shetzrichi litvol kechatos hapenimios is what the Bach has the girsa, that you do need to dip just like the inner chatos. It's not enough that a monkey would take it and place the blood on his finger. You do need the finger to take it, so to speak, because the word velokach is going on the etzba as well. And so therefore that's why in fact it is a chiddush, it is something that the Brisa needs to teach, that there's no pigul at that point in time when the Kohen is dipping his finger by the chatos hachitzonos. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Mishnah said, Rabbi Shimon machshir behilach. Rabbi Shimon says that holacha, the conveying of the blood to the mizbeach, is not an important enough avoda that there would be pigul over there, and so machsheves chutz lizmano during holacha would not disqualify the korban. That's what it means, machshir behilach. And the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish says, Moder Rabbi Shimon beholachas chatos hapnimios. Rabbi Shimon would admit that by the conveying of the blood by the inner chatos, so there shemachshava poselas behu, there machshava, if you have a bad intent during that process, it certainly would disqualify. Hoil va'avoda she'en yachol levatla, because that's an avoda that you cannot nullify. It's impossible to avoid it. Meaning to say, by when it's a situation where the blood is placed on the outer mizbeach, so in theory you can slaughter the animal right next to the outer mizbeach, and there would be no need for holacha. But in a situation of the chatos apnimios, where the blood has to be brought into the Beis Hamikdash, into the Eichel, so there has to be holacha. There's no way to avoid it, and since it's something that is unavoidable, therefore it is considered an important enough avoda that a machshava is able to disqualify if you have a bad machshava during that holacha. Rashi explains, Sheyefsha levatla, it's impossible to nullify it. The lav orach ara lishchot behechel, it's not proper to slaughter in the hechel. The al karcho shochto ba'azara, so he's going to have to slaughter the animal in the azara. Umolicha behechel akarnos mizbech pnimi, and then he's going to convey the blood to the hechel, to the corners of the inner mizbeach, ulahazas parochas, and then to sprinkle the blood on the parochas, which is the curtain that's in the Beis Hamikdash. And so therefore again, Reish Lakish is saying, Reb Shimon would say that holacha is significant enough that if there would be a bad machshava like pigul, in fact it would be disqualified. But the Gemara continues and asks, V'ha'amar Rabbi Shimon, but doesn't Rabbi Shimon say, Kol she'eno al mizbeach hachitzon k'shlamim, we just quoted this above, anything where the avoda, the blood is not placed on the mizbeach hachitzon, on the outer mizbeach, like a korban shlamim, ein chayav and ala mishum pigul, there is no liability of pigul, so there should be no pigul anyways, by the chatos hapnimios, according to Rabbi Shimon. So what are we saying? That there's going to be pigul by the holacha of the chatos hapnimios, because that holacha is critical, there's there's no pigul anyway when we're talking about the chatos hapnimios, because that's eino al mizbeach hachitzon. And Rashi explains, Kol she'eno, kol korban she'en matan domo, any carbon where the blood is not placed on mizbeach hachitzon, on the outer mizbeach, la'afuke chatos hapnimios, that is specifically to exclude the inner chatos, v'kasal kadaitoch, to hu adin lipsul to shalo lishmo. Right now we think that that's also true in terms of the disqualification of shalo lishmo. And what Rashi here is pointing out is that the statement over here of Reish Lakish about Rabbi Shimon admitting that by holacha it's significant enough that machshava poselas, that was not only a statement about pigul, which is a machshava chutz lizmano, it was any machshava that disqualifies. So you have shalo lishmo as well is a machshava that disqualifies. And so therefore, even if you're going to say there's no pigul by chatos hapnimios according to Rabbi Shimon, but what about the disqualification of shalo lishmo? And so that's what Rashi is pointing out. Right now we think that Rabbi Shimon would say the same thing about shalo lishmo. There is no disqualification of shalo lishmo either by the chatos hapnimios, and that's the question of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina says, Moda haya lifsol. Rabbi Shimon does admit that there's a disqualification. He says there's no liability because of pigul, but he does say that the carbon is in fact disqualified. Rashi explains, Modahu lifsol, nihida ein behen pigul. Granted that there is no pigul, lehischayiv kares al achilaso, that if somebody would eat this carbon, they'd get kares. That's true, there's no kares for eating the carbon. Avol modahu, but he admits the machshava chutz lizmano, posalto mikal v'chomer. He admits that the intention chutz lizmano would in fact disqualify from a kal v'chomer. And Rashi notes, and the Gemara could have also answered, we're talking not about the machshava chutz lizmano, we're talking about a machshava in intent, shalo lishmo, the pasla buhu, which would disqualify. Ela deboy Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina lashmiina, but Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina wants to teach us the machshava chutz lizmano, pasla buhu Rabbi Shimon. That Rabbi Shimon says even the machshava chutz lizmano, even an intention outside of the proper time, would disqualify the carbon according to Rabbi Shimon. And returning to the Gemara again, the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina, some have the gears here of Amar Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, Moda haya lifsol, again Rabbi Shimon, he admits that the machsheves chutz lizmano would disqualify the carbon even though it's not pigul, mikal v'chomer, from the following kal v'chomer. Umasha lo lishmon, if when it comes to the machshav of shalo lishmon, shehuchshru b'shlamim, which is still kosher by carbon shlamim, again as we said, shalo lishmo does not disqualify a shlamim, pasol b'chatos, it does disqualify by a carbon chatos, so chutz lizmano, when it comes to a machshava chutz lizmano sheposol b'shlamim, which in fact does disqualify a shlamim, eino din sheyifsol b'chatos. Isn't it true? Isn't it logical to say that it should disqualify by the chatos? And so therefore, again, Rabbi Shimon says that there is a disqualification over here, and since there's a disqualification, that's why Reish Lakish has to come and say that disqualification can take place by the chatos hapnimios, even by the holacha, because the holacha is critical. And the Gemara continues and asks, "Ve'eshkechon chutz lizmano." Now we find chutz lizmano, but chutz lemekomo menolan. Where do we find chutz lemekomo? And Rashi explains, chutz lizmano haposel b'shlamim, chutz lizmano, which does disqualify by shlamim. And Rashi notes, umiu kares lo nafka lon bo minon. Now this kal v'chomer, we're making a kal v'chomer here to say that there is a concept of disqualification by the chatos hapnimios, by machshavas chutz lizmano. Why don't we use the same kal v'chomer to say that there should be kares? Just like we find by shlamim there's kares, so too we should find over here there's kares. But again, we're not saying that there's kares over here. Rashi says, no, nevertheless, kares we don't learn from, because this whole kal v'chomer is built because of shalo lishmo. We're saying since shalo lishmo is kosher by shlamim, but it is possible when it comes to chatos, therefore chatos is stricter, and therefore we can also say that the machshavas chutz lizmano disqualifies by the chatos hapnimios. But since it's all coming from shalo lishmo, by shalo lishmo there is no kares. When you're learning from something, you can't go further than the source you're learning from, and so therefore again, since shalo lishmo doesn't create pigul and create a chi of kares, therefore we're not going to learn out a chi of kares by the machsheves chutz lizmano. And Rashi continues, chutz lemekomo menolan. Okay, we find chutz lizmano. Where do we find chutz lemekomo? The chutz lemekomo nami b'shlamim ksib, because chutz lemekomo also is written by a carbon shlamim. Uminayu gamrinon l'chol azvachim. We learn from there to all karbonos. Ul Rabbi Shimon de lo gamer minayu ela chitzonos kemosa. Now according to Rabbi Shimon, who only learns to the outer karbanos like a shlamim, so manolan de pasla bepnimios, how do we know that chutz l'mekomo disqualifies by the chatos hapnimios? Right now this Kal V'chomer is teaching us that chutz l'zmano disqualifies. How do we know chutz l'mekomo by the chatos hapnimios? And the Gemara continues, imi chutz l'zmano, if you're going to say that we learn chutz l'mekomo from chutz l'zmano, but mal chutz l'zmano shekein kares, but what's unique about chutz l'zmano is it involves kares. As we said, there's kares over there. And so therefore you can't really learn chutz l'mekomo from chutz l'zmano. Now, imi shalo l'shma, maybe you'll say we'll learn from shalo l'shma, which we're learning chutz l'zmano from shalo l'shma. So you'll say we'll learn shalo l'shma, from there we're going to learn the idea of chutz l'mekomo, but there it's also unique. Shekein noeg bebama. Shalo l'shma is something that applies even in the time when they would bring karbonos on bamos, which were mizbeach, which was when you had a mizbeach outside of the Beis HaMikdash. So the concept of shalo l'shma applies by a bama. The concept of chutz l'mekomo doesn't apply by a bama because there is no makom over there. The bama could be anywhere, and so therefore you can't learn chutz l'mekomo from shalo l'shma. And the Gemara continues and says, well, shalo l'shman b'may noeg, the whole psul, the whole disqualification of shalo l'shma, where does that come from, or where does that apply? B'pesach v'chatas, that only applies by carbon pesach and carbon chatas, and it happens to be pesach v'chatas b'bama lo karvu. You can't bring a carbon pesach and you can't bring a carbon chatas on a bama, on an altar that's outside of the Beis HaMikdash, and so therefore, really, we can learn chutz l'mekomo from shalo l'shma as well. And Rashi explains, Shekein noeg bebama, again, shalo l'shmo applies by a bama, bekarban bamas yochid b'shas heter habamas. We're talking when an individual has a bama at the time when bamas were allowed. Sharei shinoi kodesh, again, this is shinoi kodesh. This is just a change in kodesh. You have in mind a different carbon. That's what shalo l'shmo is. Tomar b'chutz l'mekomo. Now, whereas by chutz l'mekomo, delo she'ein mechitza bebama, there is no concept of chutz l'mekomo by a bama, because there's no mechitza, there's no partition by a bama. There is no specific location. V'chol habika mekomo at sof olam, all the way till the end of the world, it's possible to have bama. Umeshani, and the Gemara answers, shalo l'shmo b'may noeg. When does shalo l'shmo apply? Be'eza carbon atamotzi psula. Where do you find this disqualification? Which carbon has the disqualification of shalo l'shmo? Be'pesach v'chatas. It's carbon pesach and carbon chatas. V'hani be'bama lo karvi. And those are not brought on a bama. Tetanan l'kamon, because we learned in a mission later on, kol hanidar v'nidav, anything that's donated, kari be'bama, you bring on a bama. You're able to bring on a bama. V'sheino nidar v'nidav, but if it's not a donated carbon, eino karif b'bama, it cannot be brought on a bama. And the Gemara continues, Viba is saying, if you want, I could say, how do we know chutz l'mekomo by the chatos hapnimios hekeshu? It's actually learned from a hekesh, from a comparison. Because shlishi, when it says in the pasuk shlishi, zeh chutz l'zmanu, that's a reference to chutz l'zmanu. And pigel, when it says the word pigel in the pasuk, zeh chutz l'mekomo, that's a reference to chutz l'mekomo, and that is a hekesh, and therefore we are able to learn chutz l'mekomo from chutz l'zmanu. Rashi explains, Viba is saying, chutz l'mekomo mi chutz l'zmanu asi. If you want, I could say the chutz l'mekomo is learned from chutz l'zmanu. V'lo porchinon shekein kares. You can't refute it by saying that chutz l'zmanu involves kares to hekeshahu, because here we're dealing with a hekesh. It's a comparison to iskish chutz l'mekomo l'chutz l'zmanu. Chutz l'mekomo was compared to chutz l'zmanu b'perek sheni in the second perek. B'kra achrina, in another pasuk, da'aminim he'achol yachel bayom hashlishi. When it says bayom hashlishi, zeh machsheves chutz l'zmanu. That's a reference to chutz l'zmanu. Lo yechashav lo pigol yeh. When it says pigol yeh, kra yiseru, that's an extra pasuk. La'asuye chutz l'mekomo, to include chutz l'mekomo. V'kevan de iskish kaminan mehadadi, since there's a comparison, you can learn one from the other. Ve'ein meshivan ala hekesh, and you're not able to refute a hekesh. You can't refute a comparison. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava says, Im timsaloma Rabbi Shimon savar la kivrei. If you say that Rabbi Shimon holds like his son Rabbi Lazar, the Amar, that Rabbi Lazar says, Bein ha'ulam v'la mizbeach, between the entrance hall of the Beis HaMikdash and the mizbeach tzafon, that's considered to be the north, and ein machshava moeles b'holeches chatos hapnimios. If you hold like that, then machshava, meaning to say if a person has a bad machshava, a bad intent, it's not going to be moeles, it's not going to disqualify by the holachas chatos hapnimios, by the conveying of the blood of the chatos, of the inner chatos, elami pesach ulam vilifnim, only from the entrance hall, only from the actual entrance of the ulam and inward. And Rashi explains, Amar Rava says, Im timsalomar Rabbi Shimon savar la kivrei di Amar lakamon beperek sheni. If Rabbi Shimon holds like his son Rabbi Lazar, who says later on in the second perek, bein ha'ulam la mizbeach tzafon, he says that between the entrance hall and the mizbeach is north, meaning chelek tzvoni sheba'azara, Azara, shebein ha'ulam v'la mizbeach, the northern part of the Azara between the ulam and the mizbeach. So you go from the mizbeach to the ulam, which is the entrance hall of the Beis HaMikdash. That area between the mizbeach and the ulam, that northern section, afal gav de lo karinan bei al yerech hamizbeach tzafona. Even though you're not right next to the mizbeach on the north side of the mizbeach, dehabima'aravo shel mizbeachu, because technically you're actually west of the mizbeach. Havet tzafon, but it is considered north. Le'inyan shchitas kachei kachim, as far as the slaughtering of kachei kachim are concerned. And the point over here is, again, we said according to Rabbi Shimon that any part of the holacha that is critical, that is absolutely necessary, is considered important enough that if during that part of the process, that part of the holacha, you have a disqualifying intent, it's going to disqualify the carbon. So over here, essentially all we're saying is, according to Rabbi Lazar, you theoretically can slaughter all the way up to the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash, the entrance of the ulam, because all of that is considered to be north, even though it's not directly north of the Mizbeach. And so Rashi continues, Ein machshava moelis bechatos hapnimios afilu lifsol. The intent is not going to be effective by the inner chatos, even to disqualify, elami pesach ulam v'lifnim, only from the entrance of the entrance hall and inward. Shem chisha beholachas hadam mimokom shchitaso ad ha'ulam. Let's say he slaughters the animal, he doesn't slaughter it right by the entrance to the entrance hall. So from the area where he slaughtered it until the entrance hall, ein machshava. If he has a bad machshava, that doesn't count. Sharei efshar levatel holachazu, because this holacha was not necessary, because lishchot eitzel pasachulim, he could have slaughtered it right at the entrance of the entrance hall. Avali savar Rabbi Yossi, but if he holds like Rabbi Yossi, the polig ad Rabbi Lazar Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Yossi argues on Rabbi Lazar, the son of Rabbi Shimon. V'yomer ein safon elo keneged hamizbeach mikir hamizbeach tzafoni ad kosel azar tzafonis. He says that north of the mizbeach literally means it has to be to the north of the mizbeach. He can't go beyond the mizbeach to the west. Then havelavo the she'ein yachol levatla. Then that conveyance of the blood is not an avoda that you could have gotten rid of. Because the chatos needs to be slaughtered in the north. It says that you have to slaughter in the place where you slaughter the ola, v'tzafon bi ola ksiv, and north is written by the ola. And the Gemara continues, V'im tim solomar, and if you say, Savar lak Rabbi Yehuda, that Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda, Diamar toch azara mekadesh, Rabbi Yehuda holds that the azara itself can be mekadesh. We'll see Rashi in a moment. But if you hold that, ein machshava moeles, b'holachas siluk bazichin, then the machshava, let's say a person has the wrong intent when he is conveying and he's removing the bazichin, which were the spoons that held the frankincense, you would burn those on the outer mizbeach, so that machshava is not going to be effective, elami pesach heichal v'lachutz, only from the entrance of the heichal towards the outside. And Rashi explains, V'im tim solomar Rabbi Shimon savar lak Rabbi Yehuda, if you say that Rabbi Shimon holds like Rabbi Yehuda, Diamar lekamon b'perakot shei kodshim, he says later on in perakot shei kodshim, toch azara mekadesh, it means as follows, kol ritzpas ha'azara, the entire floor of the azara, the entire floor of the courtyard, bein ha'ulam v'la mizbeach, between the entrance hall to the Beis HaMikdash and the mizbeach, mikudeshes, all of that is sanctified, lahaktir chalovim k'mizbeach atzmo, so you can burn the chalovim on the floor of the azara just like the mizbeach. In other words, you can theoretically take the frankincense every week, it would be burned on the mizbeach. Instead of burning it on the mizbeach, you could actually burn it on the floor of the azara, that was the floor between the mizbeach and the entrance hall of the Beis HaMikdash itself. Techsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, Bayomahu Kiddush HaMelech as Toche Chotzer V'Tanya L'Kamon Dvarim Kechsavon Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda understands the pasuk exactly as it's written, and so therefore again Toche Chotzer, essentially meaning the floor of the azara, has that kedusha. So if you hold that, so Ein Machshava Moelas L'Rabbi Shimon, the Machshava, the wrong intent, is not going to be effective to disqualify according to Rabbi Shimon. B'Holochas Bazichei Lechem HaPanim. This was the bazichim, the spoons that held the frankincense of the Lechem HaPanim. Essentially, they acted the same as a kamitza acts when a person takes the komets from a carbon mincha and burns that on the mizbeach, which allows the rest of the carbon mincha, that's the offering. The komets is the offering essentially on behalf of the carbon mincha. The same thing was true of the bazichin when they took the frankincense and they offered that on the mizbeach. That was like the offering on behalf of the Lechem HaPanim. Shehein matir nes halechem. They allowed the bread kedam hamatir sabasar. That would be similar to the blood also of a carbon, let's say, the blood that's thrown on the mizbeach when you do the zrikas adam, that permits the meat of the carbon. Uchekomets, and again, like we just said, it's like the komets of a carbon mincha hamatir as hashirayim, which allows the remainder. V'halechem and there's a concept of pigul. Let's say a person has a wrong intent when he does the avoda with the bazichim, then the lechem aponim becomes pigul. Hoel v'hein matir, because that's what permits the lechem aponim. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Yehuda Savarlan. Rabbi Shimon, if he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, ein machsheves holacha moelos bolifsol elami pesach heichal v'lachot. So then the wrong intent is not going to be effective to disqualify, except from the entrance of the heichal to the outside. Mishehigia lepesach heichal, meaning to say when you reach the entrance of the heichal, ad shemagia liyetzias ulam, until you reach the exit of the ulam, l'ritzbas ha'azara shalafanav, to the floor of the azara that's right in front of him. Meaning to say, devechol ha'heichal lo mahanya machshava, meaning to say, the entire heichal, a person has the wrong intent, that holacha, when he's conveying the bazichin throughout the heichal, that doesn't count. Sharei kol heichal kasher lahoshav sham shulchan, because technically, you can put the shulchan anywhere in the heichal, and you can put it right up to the entrance of the heichal, l'sadr alav ad pesach, you can do that right up until the entrance. And again, according to Rabbi Shimon, only holacha that's absolutely necessary is considered important enough that if you have the wrong intention, it disqualifies. And so therefore, the shulchan, the conveying from the shulchan to the entrance of the heichal, is not really necessary, because theoretically the shulchan can be right at the entrance of the heichal. V'ulam ki azara sviralon, and the ulam is like the azara we hold. Umin ha'ulam velachotz nami lo mahanya machshava, and from the ulam to the outside also, the machshava is not going to be effective b'holach in terms of the conveyance. Sharei efshar lahaktiro al ritzbas ha'azara miyad, because if the person wants, he can burn it on the floor of the azara immediately, im yirtz if he wants. Nimtzatz holochaso adam mizbeach shalol l'tzorach. It comes out that carrying it to the mizbeach is not really necessary, because if you want, you could burn it right on the floor of the azara. And we will note over here that when Rashi says the ulam is like the azara, Rashi does not mean to say that you can burn the frankincense in the ulam, because if you were able to burn the frankincense in the ulam, then the machshava in the ulam also, in the entrance hall also, would not be effective to disqualify, because you could burn it right away. There would actually be no need to convey anywhere. What Rashi means to say is the ulam is like the azara, and it's not like the heichal, and so you can't place the shulchan in the ulam. So the only place where you actually need to do holacha is from the entrance of the heichal through the ulam, because over there you can't actually place the shulchan in the ulam, and you can't actually burn the frankincense in the ulam, and so therefore that's the only part of the holacha that's necessary, and that's the only part of the holacha where if you have the wrong intent, it can disqualify. And the Gemara continues along these lines, V'yim timtzu lomar, and if you say, Savar kedushas heichel v'ulam chodahi, if you say that the kedusha of the heichel and the ulam are one, meaning to say you're able to place the shulchan in the ulam, so then ein machshava moelas elami pesach ulam v'lachutz. So then the machshava is only going to be effective from the entrance of the ulam to the outside, meaning that area within the entrance of the ulam itself, the entrance to the ulam itself, there you wouldn't be able to place the shulchan, that small amount of space, and there machshava, if you have the wrong intention, it would be effective to disqualify. V'im tim salomar, and if you're going to say tocha pesach kilifnim, let's say you say that within the entranceway of the ulam, let's say you say that that's considered like in the ulam, so then you could place the shulchan there. So ein machshava moeles afilu psia achas, so then the machshava, the wrong intent, is not going to be effective to disqualify even one step, because theoretically the shulchan can be placed even within the entrance to the ulam. Ela b'chtei hoshotas yado, only the amount to stretch your hand out. Let's say the Kohen has to stretch his hand out from the ulam to the floor of the azara to burn the frankincense. In that action of stretching out his hand, then if he has the wrong intent, that would be a holacha, that would be a significant enough holacha that if he has the wrong intent, it would disqualify. But the Gemara says, V'yim tim salomer, if you say, Savar holacha shalo beregel lo shma holacha, that if you're conveying without the feet, meaning just stretching your hand is not even called holacha, because it actually has to involve the walking of the Kohen, so then that's not even a significant action, the hoshatas yado. So ein machshava moelas klal. So then the machshava, the wrong intent, is not going to be effective at all to disqualify, because really there is nothing that's considered to be a critical part of the avod in terms of holacha, because again, you can place the shulchan at the very entrance of the ulam, and then you could just stretch out your hand and burn the frankincense on the floor of the azara, and the stretching out of the hand is not considered a significant enough action, and so therefore there is no significant enough holacha, even again if you place the shulchan in the actual heichal and you actually do walk it all the way to the mizbeach, but none of that is critically necessary, and therefore there is no significant enough holacha where if you'd have machshava, if you'd have the wrong intent in that holacha, it would disqualify the carbon, and so therefore again in machshava moelas klal, there'd be no disqualification based on machshava. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garsinan, this is the proper text. V'im tim salomar savar Rav Yishimon kedushas ulam v'heichel chadi. If you're going to say that the sanctity of the ulam and the heichel are the same, ein machshava moelas elami pesach ulam v'lachutz. Then the machshava is only going to be effective from the entrance of the entrance hall towards the outside. Kilomar, what that means to say is, Hey amos shall ove kosel pischo shel ulam. The entrance of the ulam, the thickness of the wall was 5 amos. So the doorway essentially was 5 amos. It would just be in that space that the holacha would be critical to v'chol chalolo shel ulam, because in the actual entrance hall, lo mahanya, so there the machshava would not be effective, to kibifnim dami, because that's like being in the heichel, and so therefore you could even place the shulchan there theoretically. V'chutz lepesach lo mahanya def shel hakdasham, and outside of the entrance of the ulam, that's not going to be effective, because again it's possible to just burn it right on the floor of the azara, as we just said. V'yim tim salomar savar latoch pesach ulam kilifnim, and if you're going to say within the doorway of the ulam is like in the heichel, or is like in the ulam, which is like in the heichel, ein machshava moelas afilu psia shalema ele b'chtei hoshatas yado. So then just the stretching out of the hand is the only thing that's really critical. Meaning omed bepesach ulam, the kohen could stand by the entrance of the ulam, umoshet yado l'ritzban, and stretch his hand out to the floor of the azara, and hainu holacha, that would be the holacha, umahanya b'machshava. Machshava could be effective within that action. Hachi garsinan, and then the proper text is v'yim tim salomar holacha shelo b'regel lo shma holacha. If you say holacha without walking is not holacha, then ein machshava moelas klal, then machshava is not effective at all. To hoshatas yado holacha shelo b'regelhi, because stretching out the hand is a holacha without the feet. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Amar le Abaye le Amori de Rav Chisda. Abaye said to the announcer or to the interpreter of Rav Chisda, Boi minei Rav Chisda. Ask Rav Chisda the following question: Holacha bizar mahu. If it's conveyed, let's say the blood is conveyed to the mizbeach by a zar, by a non kohen, what's the halacha? Amar le Ksheira, he said that that's okay and the carbon is still good. Umikra mesayeni, and a pasuk supports me. This is a pasuk in Divrei Hayomim. Vayishchetu es haPesach vayizriku hakohanim es hadam miyodam v'halavim afshitim. It says that they slaughtered the carbon Pesach, and then it says the kohanim threw the blood miyodam from their hands. Presumably this means from the hands of non-kohanim. Rashi explains vayizriku hakohanim es hadam miyodam shel shochtim, meaning from the hands of those who did the slaughtering. Mashma, that's how the pasuk's understood. V'shochtin is zorim ninu, and the people doing the slaughtering are non-kohanim. V'yashmin and krasha hazorim lochin oso miyad hamekabel umolichin oso lizrok. And so the pasuk is teaching us that non-kohanim would take the blood from the person who was mekabel, who received the blood, and then they would convey the blood. They would walk it over in order that it be thrown, in order that the zrika be done. And the Gemara continues. Mesev Rav Sheshis. Rav Sheshis asks a question from the following brisa: Zar, a non-kohen, va'onen, and somebody who's an onen, who's in the acute period of mourning. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yudalid Amid Beis.